I'm going to preempt one of the tweets we'll share with you a little bit later on, and this is around, sort of cryptocurrencies and people saying, as long as we're not talking about that, let's certainly talk about cashless. Well, let's keep on this conversation piece and bring in Futurist, Economist and business trends analyst Bronwyn Williams. Bronwyn, good evening to you and welcome. It seems the world is moving into, sort of cashless environment and arena. Welcome to the program, by the way. I'd love for you to share what you're observing, particularly from a South African point of view, vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
Yeah, sure. So definitely we are moving towards a more digitized society, not just in terms of cash, but in terms of our interactions. I'm now talking to you on a Zoom call, right? So digitization is the trajectory and the overall trend that we are on. There are, of course, different degrees of digitization when it comes to payments. And of course, cash is at the very analog side. We have these interim steps, things like credit cards. What we're moving towards now is new means of payment, and particularly those that are involving our smartphones. But thereafter, like you were saying, we are nudging in certain parts of the world towards things like fully digital economies or digital central banks or digital identities tied to digital wallets, which is, of course, the trajectory that we're still heading towards. Seeing things like cashless restaurants or stores popping up in our day-to-day lives can just be seen as another sort of signal along that road to a much more digitized economy where increasingly our access to goods, services, and opportunity might not only be defined by the cash in your wallet, but also by your social credit that can now be made explicit. Now, that's not a totally futuristic thing to say at all. Already, if you're using e-hailing services as both drivers and as riders, we have different ratings. And that different rating means that you and I might pay a different price for exactly the same ride and exactly the same car based on our intrinsic social credit. This is the
hold on. I want to bring you back in because I know that once I press go, this is such an exciting and innovative, rich environment that there's so many things you want to share with us. But I want to slow it down if I can, Bronwyn, and bring it back to the very first part of what you were saying, just in those initial transitions, moving away from cash and using, credit wallets and, all sorts of different alternatives to cash. And that can be quite complicated on its own. Is everyone on board at the same time? There are some people who are more tech savvy and, quite comfortable using, wallets on their phones and paying that way, or using, credit cards or using plastic. But there are large numbers of people who still prefer to transact with paper. How do you get everyone to be in the same universe at the same time?
Well, that depends on who's implementing these policies. Now, when we see retailers saying they're going to go cashless, most of them will still accept credit cards, the sort of interim digital currency that many of us have been used to for our entire natural lives. I mean, if we're all getting older these days, credit cards have been around for a while. They are a form of digital currency. But more and more, there are more and more payment options that we can use that use things like QR codes. Again, there's many services, and in fact, there's been a forerunner in trying to adopt these sorts of things. And they've also taken off in many other developing, as they call them, markets in places like China and in India, because they don't involve huge amounts of infrastructure in order to get people buying into this new technological future. As I said, that's the one barrier. So that's the technological barrier. So that's the fact that if you need to have some sort of a smartphone and able to use these new payments mechanisms, whether they be like an Apple Pay or attaching your Visa card or your MasterCard to an app on your phone that allows you to pay with your phone, that's a different technology or different means, but in essence, in the background, it works very much the same way that your credit card works. It's just instead of having the plastic, that information is encoded on an app on your phone. And depending on what retailer you transact with, they'll accept different apps or different credit cards. Even now, like Amex might not be accepted in certain stores. So it depends on the retailer which one they're going to accept there. So it's not a huge step change, but there are barriers to entry there in terms of people who cannot afford or don't currently possess a smartphone that would be excluded from making payments using certain payment systems, which can be a bit of a problem in terms of financial inclusion. But it's also people that don't want to necessarily use digital cash, whether that be the current forms of digital cash in terms of credit cards or digitized credit cards, which is where we are now, or as I said, going to the future, like digital currencies, which is something governments are working on, but we're not quite yet there with. what all these digital forms of payment have in common is that they can be tracked and traced by not only your bank and your payment service provider, but also, of course, by SARS, by your tax collecting agencies. Whereas cash payments can often fall, shall we say, under the radar of SARS. You know how this works in the so-called grey economy. So there's quite good incentive for governments to want to push us towards having more traceable transactions, which is absolutely real. Digitized transactions can be easier monitored by bodies like SARS to make sure that everyone is paying their share, right? So this is where we start to see sort of acceleration, both in terms of retailers who might want to switch to cashless environments for security reasons or for cost efficiency reasons, because carrying cash has a cost, particularly when you got to pay for security. But also, of course, governments are very interested in this in order to plug the leaks in buckets. And in South Africa, we have a very big cash economy. So that is a quite high priority on anyone working in SARS at the moment who has seen our tax base declining. They're going to be looking for ways to plug those cracks. And one of the ways to do that is to encourage, incentivize, or even mandate transitions to more digitized and track and traceable transactions.
Bronwyn, thank you very much for that. It's been a 5-minute masterclass, and we appreciate you for that. Certainly a space to watch. We must also talk in future, if possible, around security, because that's where a lot of the resistance and the barriers to entry are, is that people are worried that if they have their identities out there, their cards out there, and it's digital, that they could be cloned and their money could disappear, poof, before their very eyes. Thank you for talking to us tonight. We appreciate you. That was Futurist, Economist, and Business Trends Analyst, Bronwyn Williams.